authors, I'm Joanne Morrell, children's and young adult fiction writer and author of short non-fiction for authors. Thanks for joining me for the Hybrid Author podcast, sharing interviews from industry professionals to help you forge a career as a hybrid author, both independently and traditionally publishing your books. You can get the show notes for each episode and sign up for your free author pass over at the Hybrid Author website to discover your writing process, get tips on how to publish productively, and get comfortable promoting your books at www.hybridauthor.com.au. Let's crack on with the episode. Authors. I hope you're all keeping well in whatever part of the world you reside and listen to the podcast in. Today's interview is with award-winning children's author Meg McKinlay on repetitive strain injury, RSI. Meg shares her experience with battling RSI and other chronic pain, what the signs of RSI can be, ways you might go about managing RSI, and certain mechanics on how you may avoid developing RSI through various practices. And of course, as Meg states in the interview, she isn't a medical professional, nor am I. Rather, Meg simply shares her experience on the subject, which I know you will all find extremely useful. So in my author adventure this week, it's been a bit of a struggle actually, which is, I suppose, kind of fitting with today's topic. Yeah, I have to admit on all fronts really. The writing, children, just all of it has just been one of those fickle weeks, I guess. Yeah, my husband is been working most of the week, so I've had the children full time, and I think it's just constant without having a break or time to myself, which I'm someone who definitely needs that. And I don't know if it was just that or, you know, I just noticed as well with my writing, I am here, there and everywhere. I will sit down. My intention will be to get up to do some writing on a specific project, and I'll sit down at the computer, and then my mind's gone off to this place, and then I've just jumped across there, here, everywhere, and I've honestly gone to about 5 different things. It's a real lack of focus, so it's either... I don't think I'm overloaded. I just think it's the way that I work. I'm just fast this way, that way, and I really have to rein it in. But I was actually noticing, I was watching myself from afar do these things so I can be aware of pulling myself back down to earth and being like, no, you've got up to do this task, you need to do that. And so I was feeling a bit lackluster because I think jumping all over the place, and then you sort of end up falling on your arse and doing nothing at all really. So from sort of feeling a bit blah, I sat down and made an Excel spreadsheet and broke down the tasks for each area of my book business that I needed to do something in. So, you know, there's writing, obviously writing an ongoing project. So for myself at this moment, if you listen to the podcast, you'll know, well, sort of know, because I'm only talking about this on my newsletter. I'm into a women's fiction project, and if you're interested in keeping up to date with what's happening there, you can sign up for your free author pass at the hybridauthor.com.au website, and then you'll start getting fortnightly newsletters from me, keeping you up to speed there. So there's that, and there's quite a lot involved with that at the moment. So I've broken down those little tasks into chunks daily, little things that I've got to get done, and they're kind of small, and I quite like that because, you know, even if they're small, when you achieve them, you tend to do more. I find like you could move on to more for the next day and be ahead of the game, or just be happy and satisfied that you actually achieved those 2 things today for that specific project. And there was some joy in actually writing next to it, achieved, because I do reflect on this podcast for my processes and all the rest, and that's a good thing. But I think that just the little things I need to be more aware of. Yeah, you know, you did this today, good on you, and that's great. Pat yourself on the back type of thing. And the other areas was, you know, currently I've got 2 non-fiction books that are out, Author Fears and How to Overcome Them, and Freelance Writing Quick Tips for Fast Success. For those of you who haven't heard me talk about them or didn't know already, they are available for purchase. So obviously ongoing marketing of them, I need to do that. So I contacted a couple of libraries from my hometown, and you know, all that takes time as well. But just saying on this day, you know, contacting say 2 librarians, make them aware that, you know, I'm a local author, these books are here if you're interested in adding them for your collection. It's one small step forward in the author business, doing it myself anyway. And then the other side was obviously this podcast podcast, which I've been doing for obviously a couple of years, so that is quite mechanical. Yeah, and just felt so much better to have broken it down in the scheduling, organised manner. So it just shows that, you know, you can start having a bit of a crap week, a bit of a down, struggly, things aren't going so well, and just like that, something will come along the next day, turns around, and you feel a bit better about a situation. So for anyone who's listening who feels a bit lackluster with their writing or just how their whole authorship career is going, hang in there. I'm sure things will turn around for you very soon. So in caravan plans, we, as the time of this podcast goes out, we will have left Darwin, and we have been here. It's very bittersweet because we've been here about a month and a bit. We ended up staying extra because my husband got that extra bit of work. And I'm telling you, if you've never been here, come here. It is fantastic. Well, come in the dry season anyway, which it's still some days the humidity is like a bit full on. You know, I had the shower the other day and I just still felt like I hadn't dried myself properly or something because I just felt wet. But I think it was just the humidity. I often think we could live here. We definitely could. The rates of pay and stuff apparently is a bit better in my husband's trade industry, and it's just amazing. There's so many spots and culture, history. It's just fantastic. But a wet season here, I just don't know if I would be able to do it. I think you'd be, you know, you're just quite sticky as it is in the dry season. But some of the days have been a bit cold. But the highlights have been going to the Mindle markets. It was Territory Day last week, I think on the 1st. I'm not sure if I talked about that last week. And yeah, they had fireworks going off, and it was just a massive community atmosphere. Everyone was down this Mindle beach, and I know that was people in town as well, and that's all been fabulous. All the free water parks here, they're like big water slides, flumes, pools and splash things for the kids. It's all free. Probably because it's so hot. I don't know. And they have this wave pool down the front, which is not free, but it's quite cheap to get into. So there's just so many great spots. It's a great place to live up here. Everyone's super nice and laid back, and I've never seen any trouble or anything like that. It's just been really great. So we are really sad to go. And even though we were saying, oh, we could stay here, I'm just like, I don't want to get stuck here. This is what we've met people going round. There was a couple at the markets in Broome, and the guy makes these beautiful stone clocks or chopping boards. I don't know how to describe it. And he said the same. They were travelling, they came to Broome, they'd only just gone on and started, and they've been there 14 years. They've never left. So we've still got to get round. We're itching to get to Queensland, so we're off to Kakadu National Park next for 3 nights, then slowly making our way into Queensland. We're kind of just hightailing it across to, I think we're going to Tablelands, again places I've never heard of before, but Cairns for a week, and then on to Mackay. Those are the 2 definites, so stay tuned. So if you love the podcast or any of the episodes have helped you further in your author career, you can now pay it forward by buying me a coffee over at buymeacoffee.com/thehybridauthor. Let's all support each other.
Meg McKinlay is a children's writer and poet. She has published 20 books for children, ranging from picture books through to young adult novels and a collection of poetry for adults. Her work has won numerous awards, including the Prime Minister's Literary Award, the Children's Book Council Book of the Year Award, the Queensland Literary Award, and the WA Premier's Book Award. Her latest title is Ella and the Useless Day. Welcome to the Hybrid Author Podcast, Meg.
Hello, thank you for having me.
We're absolutely thrilled to have you. We're just going to jump straight in and find out how you came to be a writer and have this glittering career.
Well, to be honest, hearing you read my bio and use phrases like glittering career spins me out a little bit, because I'm not someone who would ever have imagined I'd be in this position. I am not one of those people who, you know, has always wanted to be a writer. What I have always been is an observer and a scribbler of bits and pieces. I'm not a natural storyteller. Some writers will tell you, oh, I'm a storyteller first. That's not me. I am a scribbler of little fragments that have nothing to do with narrative. So for years and years, my writing was really just, you know, little bits of disconnected stuff jotted down into notebooks, fragments of observation with just little things things that caught my eye, just a turn of phrase or some funny little thought that I wanted to capture. As I say, no plan or thought of ever being a writer. But I love studying and I love thinking and I love the luxury of following ideas down the rabbit hole. And so I ended up in academia teaching and doing research and just kind of continuing to scribble bits and pieces along the way. And one day it occurred to me that one of those little scribbles was looking a bit like a poem. And so I shaped it a bit and lo and behold, it did turn into a poem. And so my very first publications, my first steps into writing were individual poems for adults rather than children, and they were in literary journals. In terms of children's writing, I got that bug after my daughter was born, which is a long time ago. She's 25 now. So I sort of returned to children's books through my love of reading to her. And one day when she was about 4, we were on a car trip and I just made a silly little comment to entertain her that turned into a silly little beginning of a story. And I guess because I was reading her all those picture books, there's something in me turned on and I thought, hang on a minute, this sounds like it could be, the start of a story. And so I wrote it and I sent it off and that's where things began. But it wasn't a straight line by any means. I sent that story off. Oh, and that book was eventually published, but not for many, many, many years. It ended up being my 10th book. I had a lot of learning to do and I wrote many picture books and several novels before something was eventually picked up. It was about 5 years of trying, hundreds of rejections, all kinds of things. So yeah, I started thinking about writing for children in about 2003, 2004, and then it was 2007 when my first book was published. A long and winding road.
Yeah, it sounds like you've run the gauntlet, but also that it was meant to be.
Yeah, I mean, maybe I'm wary of those sorts of thoughts of that. This was meant to be. This is where everything has been heading all along. That way of seeing things. That I guess wherever you end up, you can look back and say, "Well, it's obvious how things were heading in this direction because that's how things work in retrospect, right?" But I feel really grateful and am really glad that I found a way to narrative. It still doesn't come naturally. I'm still much more at home with, the sentence fragment and the image and the poem and that sort of thing.
Absolutely, yes. Well, today's topic isn't so glittery and glamorous
No.
as narrative.
A different sort of struggle, yeah.
Yes, on repetitive strain injury, RSI. So we would love to hear your story about RSI. How it might be a new term to our listeners, or some people might be ignoring this term, or who knows. But when was the first time you'd ever come across it, and and then experienced it firsthand?
Sure. So I'm going to preface everything I say with the standard disclaimer of this is all my personal experience. I don't have any medical training.
Yes.
And so please, before you take any of my advice, any advice that I might offer, just, go out and do your due diligence. But my experience with repetitive strain injury, RSI, it's a term, I suppose I've known it all my life, really. It's a phrase that I was familiar with as something that didn't apply to me. It's a thing that happens to old people or, weak people. And I'm putting these terms in inverted commas because I think I had the invincibility of youth, despite having grown up with some health issues, I would never have imagined that something like this was going to be a part of my life. I guess I've known of RSI as something that happens to people who, perform the same motion over and over, workers on the factory line, that sort of thing. I knew it as a thing that applied to elbows and to wrists, your tennis elbow and all that sort of thing. But I would not have thought that that could have anything to do with me. I had some very early niggles of pain in my wrists. I would say wrists, hands, forearms back in probably 2014. So that's 7 years after my first book was published. And I was not writing full time then. I had left academia in order to have more time to write, but I was working part time for an arts organisation. And what I was doing was I was managing their digital communications. So I was working remotely and I was doing all of the online stuff. I was loading content onto their bulletin board, really, really click heavy work. It involved a lot of mousing back and forth. So in addition to my writing, my emailing and all the other mouse related and keyboard stuff, I was doing this work, which was just, I think for me that was probably the tipping point, that just that clicking and that clicking and that clicking and then constant having to move around through different fields, and started to get all these little niggles. And as I say, I suspect it wasn't just the writing, it was the combination of all those things. Of course, because they were just niggles and because I was invincible, I ignored it all, you know, in the way that you ignore things until they go away. But it didn't go away. What happened was it started to get worse over time. It settled into a sort of a low-level background hum, consistent but low level. And if it's low level, you can still ignore it. I did start to employ some strategies at that point. I began to parcel up tasks sort of into different bites of time. I started to mouse with my left hand, but what I didn't do was I didn't reduce load. And partly that was out of loyalty to this organisation that I was working for. They had no one else to do the work, and so I had to do it. So I just kept putting in the hours every day, doing all of this clicking that I could tell. It became more and more apparent that this was, and I'm going to use the word toxic because it was physically toxic for me. And so it was a progression from the first niggles in around 2014 to a real tipping point in early 2017, when it was abundantly clear that this was a real problem. I was still ignoring it, but my hands and wrists and forearms were screaming at me and telling me to stop.
Was it, when you say niggles, was it like tingling, or was it pain, or was it burning or heat, or?
Yeah. So when it was niggles, and that's probably the first sign that I'm not a doctor. You know, that I don't think that is a diagnostic term, the niggles, but just probably to begin with, sort of a dull ache in the wrist, some tingles in the hands. I mean, I live now with that what they call peripheral neuropathy, which is that tingling in the hands and fingers and that sort of thing. When I wake up, most mornings I feel like my hands are asleep. You know, when your feet go to sleep and that sort of thing, it feels like my hands are twice the size that they should be, and that they are completely numb and swollen. They're not actually swollen. That's how it feels now. But in the beginning, it was probably low-level tingling, bit of a dull ache. But at that point, if I backed off, you know, if I went off and did something else for a few hours, if I had some time away from clicking, it would settle down. But that is a bit of a trap, because when it settles down and you tell yourself, therefore, it's fine and it's settled down, you've dealt with it, you can resume normal programming. That's where the repetitive strain and wear is coming in. So, yeah. And I am more fortunate than most people in some regards, because my husband he's a clinical psychologist, but he works in chronic pain management. And he said to me when I was first saying, oh, my wrists, it's really painful, you know, he said, don't ignore this. Don't be stupid about it. He said, I see this all the time. It starts out as nothing and people ignore it because it's nothing, and they come to me when they're in a crisis. Please don't be foolish. And of course, I was foolish.
Yep.
And yeah.
As probably most of us would be, though, you know, and especially if you're doing something that is your work and you're involved in it, and it's just, like you said, you can feel invincible.
You've got things that you're trying to get done, and so you keep saying, I'll just get this finished, I'll meet this deadline, I'll get this work done, and then I'll deal with that. But there's always one more thing, and your body, it's not going to wait.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, goodness me. From obviously it getting worse, did your husband advise you on who to see, and what came after that?
It's one of those funny grey areas where, I mean, you can get a diagnosis. You can go to a GP and say, hey, I've been doing all this clicking for 20 years and now my wrists and arms are on fire and I physically can't use them. And he'll say, well, it's RSI, which is, it's one of those obvious things that it's a sort of an umbrella term that can encompass all sorts of injuries. But what I was experiencing was classic RSI, which is, I mean, if you look up, just go to Dr. Google. It is a case where you can go to Dr. Google and it will tell you wrists, arms, hands, tendons, etc. This is what's happening. It doesn't really change the management. Some people will be, my GP said, look, you can try a wrist brace. If it gets really bad, there are steroid injections and that kind of thing. It was already really, really bad at that point. I didn't want to go down the path of injections. I wanted to try behavioral and functional management, because I knew in myself, I'm the kind of personality and the kind of person that if I went and got a steroid injection that backed it off and brought me a bit more relief, I was just going to then push back up to that line as far as I could, because I was still working for the arts organisation that I was working for. It was, and I know I keep referring to this in a way that's probably strange, but the fact is we were a 2-person team, and there was only one of me to do that job, and there was no one who could step in and pinch hit. And I felt a sense of loyalty for this organisation, and the work was there every single day, and it had to be done. And I was the person who had to do it, and so I was in this situation. So I knew in myself that if I went and got some kind of term relief, that I would take that as an opportunity to just keep working. And so what I had to do were much more functional and long-term changes. And so that is what I did. And look, I had reached the point in 2017. It sounds ridiculous, but it's like any body part that you cannot imagine how much it can hurt until you've been in that situation. I've just had surgery on both feet, and I could never, and this is unrelated to the RSI, but I could never have imagined how much a toe could hurt until I got into this situation that I've been in recently, where toes are incredibly painful. Wrists, forearms, fingers, hands, I felt in 2017 as if after a few minutes at the keyboard, it was as if my hands were on fire. They were screaming at me, and I would go and put them in the freezer just to feel that cold. I would go and run cold water over them, and then I would go back and sit down at the desk and continue to do this work. I wasn't writing then because I couldn't. All I could do was this other work that was the day job, that where I was beholden to someone else. That's what I was doing. So it was clear to me that I needed to make some major changes.
Yeah, oh my gosh, that is dedication, you know, to be in that pain and then still doing it is insane. And also, I kind of agree with you, I guess, about the cortisone injections, because it sounds like, not, if that works for someone, that's great, but it sounds like it masks, you know, it's pain relief to sort of mask the underlying issue there. And then just having that, and then, yeah, going back to just full steam ahead until the next one and the next one and the next one. And probably doing what you're doing is the correct way to go forward. Is carpal tunnel, does that come under RSI? That's the same
I
thing?
believe it does. Yeah, I believe it does. And again, I wouldn't want to speak to, you know, the differences, like the shades of grey and those sorts of things. My feeling is that carpal tunnel is kind of a more specific injury. It's a more specific injury. Whereas what I had was, I mean, there may be some elements of carpal tunnel in there, but mine was much more generalized. And really, you know, and when I'm talking about it now, I can feel it, like the connection between the mind and the body is so incredibly interesting. I can sort of I'm looking down, if you could see my face now, I'm looking down at my hands and kind of imagining them glowing. Because it feels, it's less specific than I suppose your carpal tunnel might be, generalized across that whole area. And I have a funny thing now, you know, there's that cliche of the old person who can feel that weather's coming in because their trick knee is playing up or whatever. I know I've got another chronic condition I live with. I've had chronic pain for a long time, like well before this, in a different sense. And now I live with fibromyalgia, which, you know, possibly is part of the reason why I developed this. I had some underlying issues there already, or it may have been exacerbated by this and tipped over. Who knows? It's a chicken and egg thing. But I know when I'm flaring up, when I'm going into a fibro flare now, because my forearms, my wrists and arms will start to go. I can feel them start to tingle, and they feel hot and swollen. They're not actually swollen, they're not actually hot, but they feel that way. That this has become my early warning sign when I'm going into a fibro flare. So, you know, it's all connected. And obviously, I think my body was screaming at me for a while, possibly in a lower grade, less specific way. And I had been ignoring it. And it ended up everything just crystallized in the RSI, to a point where I could no longer look away.
Yeah, goodness me. How has RSI now impacted your writing? Are you still sitting at a computer doing it, or are you less frequently doing it? Or
what happened in early 2017 was that this had all gotten so bad and wasn't getting any better that I realised I am not going to be able to write at all if I continue doing this. So what I did was, out of sheer desperation, I bought a headset and I bought some voice recognition software, and I would never in a million years have thought that I could be someone who could work like that. I had an incredible resistance to doing it. I thought this is not going to work, but I had got myself to a crisis point where it was really the only possibility. And so that is one major change that I've made in terms of the way that I work now. I work a lot through writing by dictating. I don't like the word dictating because it sounds so constructionist. So I did that in 2017. I made that change, and I was surprised at how quickly I adapted. I don't always work like that, but it's a matter of breaking it up and mixing it up, and if I can do 50% of my narrative work in that way, that's taking off a lot of load. I had quite early in the piece, I didn't mention this earlier, but when I started to get those early niggles, I guess, or perhaps about a year after that, I taught myself to mouse with my left hand. So again, not something I would ever have thought that I'd be able to do, but it's amazing how quickly you pick it up, and I'm fully ambidextrous in that sense now, just with the mousing. In fact, by default, I mouse with my left hand. So small changes that I made along the way that have been helpful, but in a more general, holistic sense, just not being dogged and pig-headed and listening to my body, breaking up the time, chunking. It's not good to sit at your desk for hours and hours and hours anyway. It was never good for me on a physical level. It's not good for anyone, even if you don't have pain. But I would rarely work much longer than 45 minutes at a stretch now. And a lot of that is not mousing and keyboarding and clicking. Some of that is dictation. Some of it is just sitting back and thinking. But even so, even if I haven't got a lot of words down, I will still get up after 45 minutes and I will go and do something else. And I know a lot of writers out there are probably going, oh, that's ridiculous. I can't do that. I need to get into flow. Fine. If that works for you, that's great. I would just say, just listen to what your body is telling you. We writers, we have a lot of noise in our heads, and maybe we're not as tuned into our bodies as we could be. So I have made to how I work the biggest overall change and the easiest change for anyone to make is just that pacing and chunking up of time. If you just reduce the length of time that you are spending in a single block, and then if you in other ways try to reduce the load on one side, learn to mouse with your left hand, perhaps think about adapting your writing practice in some other ways. Perhaps you can do a little bit of dictation. I don't use voice controls to edit. I would find that time consuming and frustrating. But because I am dictating most of the narrative writing that I'm doing, and it works for poetry as well, it's brilliant in that kind of conversational associative tone. It's great for that. I found it really, really functional. But because I'm doing most of that by dictation, that means that I'm not having to use the capacity of my wrists and hands for that. And that means that then I've got it for editing, which is fiddlier. And by the way, I should also say that I did eventually leave that arts job. I just said, this is not functional for me. But that was after a few years. The other thing you can do, and I know a lot of people out there are probably thinking, well, this doesn't apply to me because I don't have a problem. No one has a problem until they have a problem. And perhaps you don't have a problem until you realize you've got a problem. And that may be, as it was in my case, years after you've actually, if you're honest with yourself, seen those early warning signs, you've registered them, but you've tucked them away because you don't want to confront them. So things that you can do now, perhaps, I'm a writer and I don't want to use cliches, but the truth is prevention is better than cure. Yeah. So at the very least, even if you want to sit for 6 hours and get in flow and all the rest of it, make sure that when you're doing that, your setup is as ergonomic as you can make it. So you don't need me to tell you what that is. The information is all out there on the internet, but at least make sure that you're doing it in the most ergonomic way that you can. And there are stretches and things that you can be doing. And again, all of this information is out there really readily available on the internet. You just go out there and Google, RSI wrist stretches. And even if you think, oh, this isn't really helping me, I'm doing it now because it just feels good. And even if you think, I don't need to do this, I don't have any pain, whatever, I guarantee you there are a couple of basic stretches out there that you can do that when you do them, you are going to feel your shoulders start to tighten and then loosen. It's not just your forearms and wrists. I feel like I'm an evangelist now, but it gets the blood moving, it starts to tighten, and then reflexively you loosen everything up, and it's good for you, and it will work in a preventative mode. So those are some of the things that you can look at on kind of a low-level intervention.
Yeah, absolutely. They're all fantastic. Even for anybody who is just at a desk job, doesn't have to be writing or whatnot. It's always recommended for the stretching, isn't it? So I suppose everyone should be doing that regardless of whether they've had the tingling or the pain. But if they are looking at doing this a career and they're not doing the right things and putting their body through the stresses, and then they start to feel these things. So like you said, offloading onto other, I'm a right-hander, offloading onto the left. I found at my job, I was clicking incessantly with the index finger, and I just started moving fingers. It was actually rubbing off the top of it. It was that trigger. And also, rather than clicking, I was started rolling the mouse up and down the page, which was something that I could have done ages ago. But obviously, if you do ignore it and it has come about full steam, much like yourself, so you've now switched, you're doing little bits differently, and you're now using the dictation software. What is the software that you're using? Is it that Dragon? Or
so I use Dragon Naturally Speaking, which I'm not here to advertise any particular product.
No.
But I did think, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to do it properly, and it needs to be a purpose-built software. I had tried I think you'll find that most Microsoft packages, whatever operating system it is that you're using, will have a built-in dictation function that you can access, but that is not a good measure of how the dictation mode is going to work if you use purpose-built software. It's nowhere near as sensitive, and you can't train it in the same way. Get purpose-built software. I use Dragon. I don't know what else is out there. I found that Dragon software is fantastic. And also get yourself a decent headset that is going to work with that software and interface in a way that is going to give you the best chance of training that software so that, your error rate will gradually drop. And look, it didn't take long for me to train it up in a way that meant that it was extremely functional. And when it gets things wrong, honestly, I find it hilarious. And sometimes actually creatively useful, because it misinterprets things in a way that make me stop and laugh and relax, and sometimes send my creative brain off down rabbit holes that are actually quite useful for me in other areas.
That's amazing.
But the error rate is low now.
Yeah. Are you finding it's actually a quicker way of working?
Yes. Well, intuitively and effectively, I could work now 100%. Yes, simply because I'm so limited with what my wrists and hands can actually do. But even before, I would say, I'm a pretty fast typist. I'm old enough to have learned to do some typing when I was at school, and to have done a computer program that trained me up to type and that sort of thing. I learned to type through touch type software as well. So I'm a reasonably fast and accurate typist. But once I had accepted, and I think perhaps I was fortunate in that I had got to this crisis. Oh, look, I'm not recommending a crisis point for anyone, but because I got to this crisis point where I really had no option. This was the only way I could write. So I just had to push past the resistance, pushed past all those initial, trials and struggles with the software and all the rest of it, and said, this is what I was doing. I had no options, and that's what I did. I got to know the software. I made friends with it really, really quickly. And perhaps I was working on novels, and because, I was writing in first person, I was able to drop quite quickly into that conversational tone. And it works. It's really fast. It's as fast, if not faster, as typing. And I find that in some ways, I'm a very character-focused writer. I start with character and voice of that character, because it is a voice that is coming naturally out of me. There's something about the fact that it's not being channeled. This sounds insane, but down from my shoulders, down my arms, through my wrists, it just feels like it's more immediate somehow. And even working in third person, I tend to work in third person close point of view, and it feels like the access somehow to my characters is more immediate and direct. It's fast, it's very effective. positive for me.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, I'm glad it's working out. It's not turning a bad situation into something good, but you're working with what you've got, which is great. So you've already shared so much, Meg, so much advice to all of our listeners, who either is a cautionary tale or anybody who's starting to experience and ignore tingling or burning or feeling in their fingers. Do you have any final advice you want to share with the audience on RSI?
Look, I guess when you're asked to give your top tips, it always boils down to, sound bites and cliches. And it really is. I guess it's things like listen to your body. Don't ignore the early warning signs. Don't assume that you're invincible, even if you're young. And don't write off the alternative. I, as I said, I feel like I would have written off the idea of dictation if I hadn't been at that point where I had no alternative. And I've spoken to a few other writers online through Twitter. Occasionally you get a writer saying, oh my God, my wrists are really sore, my arm, can anyone tell me braces, stents, injections, all that kind of thing. And I will sometimes say, look, I know you might feel a bit of resistance, but this has really worked for me, this dictation. I go, oh, I don't know if I'm there yet. I think, yeah, well, maybe just give it a try, because even if you're not there yet, that idea that you have to get to that point where you can't do anything else, I feel like that's not necessarily the right way to think about it. And perhaps if you start to mix a little bit of that in early on, it'll give your body a break, but also you might find that it will lead you into a different mode of writing. So don't write yourself off as an adaptable writer, the brain that changes itself. We are so plastic and open to new ways of doing things.
Absolutely. No, well said there. And may I ask, what are you working on? What can we expect from you in the future?
What can you expect from me in the future? A lot more faffing about, I would say. A few more books. I've got a picture book that's coming out in, I think, September or October, called Always Never Always. So that's with the glorious Layla Rudge. I've got another picture book coming out early next year with Karen Blair. That is called How to Make a Bedtime. There's a few picture books in the pipeline, and picture books are where I have found myself the last couple of years because I've been struggling with longer narrative. That being said, I am working on a junior fiction, a couple of junior fictions at the moment. It's very slow going, but I am hoping to have something new out there in the next few years. We'll see how that goes.
Yes.
I can't make any promises, but I'm hopeful. I'm optimistic.
Yeah, well, it sounds like it has slowed you down, but it hasn't also. So you're still putting yourself out there and still creating lots of work. So we're very pleased for that. Can you tell our listeners where they can find all of your wonderful books?
Can I just sum it up by saying all good bookstores and also probably the average ones and probably also the secondhand bookstores. Look, you don't find a lot of my work in department stores in places like Big W and Target, but you can find them in all specialist bookstores. You can find them at all online retailers. Please don't email me and say, can I buy a book from you? Because the answer is no. And if something's out of print, then I don't have any either. My books are just in the normal places that you would find books, I suppose. Sorry, that's not a very informative answer, is it?
That's all right. But they can come to your website and see which books you've got. And
oh, yes. Yes, you can come to my website and see the many books that I have written, and I'm in all the various. I'm on social media as well. I'm not on there very much. Partly that's because of the clickiness of it, but also it's because I'm an introvert, and just the idea of, despite the amount of words that I've thrown at you today, I'm an extreme introvert, and the idea of putting myself out there in social media land is even enough for me to kind of want to take a step back and just go to the beach instead. So, I'm on Facebook, I'm on Twitter, I am on Instagram. I have a presence on all of those places. I don't post a lot. When I do post, it's often not book related. It's just some random weird thing that I've observed. But I guess based on where we began in this conversation, that's how I began as a writer, and that's how all my stories start, from some random weird thing that I've observed. So that's probably on brand for me. And in terms of self-promotion, I don't know if my publisher would agree, but that's possibly it's possibly the most organic, authentic way that I can be. So
and that's amazing. Well. Yeah, no, thank you so much, Meg. We can thank you for your expertise on this subject and joining us today. It's been incredible hearing your story, and I'm sure we've taken a lot from it. So thank you.
Thank you so much.
So there you have it, folks. Such an engaging and informative sharing of story and experience there from our very own Meg McKinlay. I'm a huge fan of Meg's books. She is a hybrid author writing across genre age groups. So go and check out her work if you haven't already. Next time on the Hybrid Author podcast, we have Dr. Aparna Barua chatting to us on women leading the way. I wish you well in your author adventure this next week. That's it from me. Bye for now.
That's the end for now, authors. I hope you're further forward in your author adventure after listening, and I hope you'll listen next time. Remember to head on over to the Hybrid Author website at www.hybridauthor.com.au to get your free author pass. It's bye for now.